What a horrendous football performance by the University of Utah. Let's talk about all of it. Every single angle and thing that went wrong, and if there's a way this team can try and fix it on this episode of Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. My name is JT Wistersill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined by friend of the show, Austin Eames, to talk about one of the most disappointing games the University of Utah has ever played, one of the most abysmal performances we've seen from this team all around. You cannot pin the loss on any one thing with the way this game shaped up for Utah. And still, they had several chances to win it with as bad as they played. I mean, they was inside the 30 7 times, and they mustered 19 points. It's truly awful. The number one thing, though, we have to start with, Austin, is Cam Rising. Cam Rising returned. The whole circus surrounding will he play, won't he play, finally came to an end when he jogged out onto the field. And it wasn't even 3 plays later till he got hit, rolled his ankle, and was not the same the rest of the game. Utah left him in the game. He was not right. He could not step into throws. He was short on throws. He was inaccurate. He threw 3 interceptions. He ended the game with less than 50% completion. He was 16 for 37. It's the first regular season game he's been below 50%. It's the worst I've ever seen Cam Rising look. I wish they had taken him out and put Isaac Wilson in. Would it have ended in something different? I don't know. Isaac Wilson turns it over through the air too, but I would have rather Isaac gone out there than what we saw from Cam, because Cam was clearly not healthy after taking that hit. And it's just really unfortunate that this is how this game played out. But I do not think they made the right decision by keeping Cam in the game.
I totally agree, JT. I mean, Isaac Wilson, yes, he's had his struggles, but I mean, when he was in games, he could make explosive plays happen. And the Cam Rising we saw play against Arizona State could not do anything. He could not move the ball downfield. He got lucky a couple times on bigger passes down the field, but for the most part, most of his completions were check downs. I think he missed more open receivers than he connected with. And like you said, it was, I think, up there, might even be the worst performance Cam Rising has ever had in a Utah uniform. And I mean, it was so hard to watch. Obviously, we all saw it after he rolled his ankle. A defensive lineman fell on top of his ankle in the first quarter. I mean, he couldn't put any weight on it, and he was throwing wobbling balls all night. And personally, I understand giving him a drive or two after that, letting him feel it out. But to let him play the rest of the game and continue making mistakes, throw 3 interceptions. I mean, I can't understand why the coaching staff couldn't go with Isaac Wilson coming out of the half.
I don't know either. And yeah, it's just one of those. I think it's by far the worst game he's ever played. I think the only other one that would even come to mind is his game against Oregon back in 22. And even that one, I mean, it was bad, but I thought tonight was even worse. If it wasn't for Mekhi Bernard, who knows what this game would have been. I can't believe how good Mekhi has been this season. We'll get back to doom and gloom in a moment. 21 carries, 129 yards, 6.1 yards per carry, a touchdown. And he also had 61 receiving yards. And yeah, it's just so frustrating to see that performance squandered. Him and Skattebo were both incredible. So I'm going to see Skattebo in my nightmares tonight. I mean, what he did. We'll talk about how absolutely just horrific the Utah defense was, especially tackling, in a moment. But back to Cam, it really just doesn't make any sense. And for those of you who maybe were watching the game, were like, I would rather have Cam in. Isaac turns the ball over. Well, I don't think Isaac would have thrown 3 interceptions. Maybe he would have. Either way, what difference does it make? So that's why I would have much rather had the guy who can push the ball down the field, can make those types of plays. And yeah, Cam would make a good throw, and you're like, oh, nice play by Cam. But the consistency was never there. He'd find an open receiver, and then it'd be just one of the worst throws you've ever seen him make, like the very next play after. And especially, okay, Andy Ludwig's turn to get some blame for this. Why in the world, when he first got hurt, the very 2 following drives after his injury, Utah started with passes? I remember last year Michigan was playing Penn State. Michigan ran the ball like 30 something times in a row. You are going to be if you're Utah, like if you're Utah, Arizona State made you throw it at different times. But the fact that they weren't trying to run on first down early, and other times they did later in the game, but like even early that's where it's just insane. There's so many play calling things we can get into. The Keithy Wildcat one will be one that's much discussed. That one, I don't love it, but I will say if it's blocked better, I think it sets Utah up for a third and short. That's Jaron Kump misses his double team block on the inside. But there are so many different play calls you can look at throughout this game. And there's just so many moments of lack of execution, receivers dropping balls in spots. I thought the offensive line overall was good, even if there are spots you can look at, like the fourth down Utah doesn't convert on. That's Spencer Fano getting beat on the top of your screen. Although I will say I thought Fano played very well. Fano and Lomu have really come along nicely. But so many instances where the play calling let this team down, but I still can't lay the blame at Andy Ludwig and Kyle Whittingham just for not taking Cam out the game. But I do think that if there's even just a couple of those passes Cam's able to hit, they win. That's where this game is so maddening. And then you get things like the Money Parks pick play. Come on, man. You got to at least try to get out of the way. You can't just run into a dude. Like he's such a good player. He's a smart player. He got that big screen for Utah. Like it's just the stuff and the moments like that. And this team would do something good, and then they would shoot themselves in the foot or just have something after. They even got lucky. Money Parks on the motion the one time. Ball bounces off him. He's lucky he got that back. They brought in Charlie Vincent early as a Wildcat running back. The ball bounced. He can't even get the snap. So there's just so many moments where it's just like, for all the time this team had over the bye, the play calling is frustrating. And for them to continue to say Cam Rising is our best option. I mean, they were committed to Cam. They said they were going to go down with the ship tonight, and they absolutely sank with the performance of an injured Cam Rising.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned so many things, JT. I mean, I don't throw around this word lightly, but it was a disaster on every level of play. I mean, everything that could go wrong went wrong. And I guess we can talk about silver linings. There's not many of them. But
Mackay.
the way
Cole Becker
played and what Mekhi Bernard did should not be understated. I think after that first quarter, Arizona knew that Cam Rising couldn't throw the ball. They knew that Utah's only play was to run the ball through Mekhi Bernard, and he still ended the game with over 100 rushing yards and over, I think, 6 yards an attempt. So what Mekhi did, like you said, was amazing. I don't want to imagine what the game would have been like if he hadn't been on the field. But I have so many problems with the personnel changes and the play calling in the red zone. I mean, switching. There were some times where Mekhi would break off big runs and he would be crushing it on drives, and then Dijon Stanley or Charlie Vincent would get snaps. And I mean, these guys are not the answer when Mekhi is running how he was running tonight. Dijon Stanley had 4 rushes for 4 yards. I mean, that's a guy that should not be getting carries over Mekhi Bernard. I understand he needs rest sometimes. He's a human. But when he's chugging out big runs, you should let him chug out big runs. And I mean, don't even get me started on the red zone offense. The past 2 games, Utah's offense can get into the red zone, but as soon as they get into the red zone, they can't get anything. I think the team has got one or two touchdowns after being in the red zone over the last 2 games with Isaac Wilson and now with Cam Rising. So it's obviously not a quarterback issue. It's a play calling issue. And I think Andy Ludwig definitely has his work cut out for him if Utah doesn't want to get embarrassed by teams like BYU. I mean, I am scared thinking what might happen in a couple weeks when Utah plays BYU if they play BYU like they played Arizona tonight.
Get their doors blown off if they at home, simply put is that if that's what happens. And I do think with what happened with Cam Rising, I'm not going to play doctor, but with him rolling his ankle, we'll see what his timeline is for recovery at this point. We can do that whole, will we see Cam again or not? I don't know, but either way, then you get Isaac back in there and just see if he doesn't turn the ball over. But it's just such a maddening and frustrating performance by this Utah team. Everyone can take a share of the blame pretty much, but I don't know why Cam was continued to allow to operate. The mistakes he was making, and I know the targeting got pulled away, which was the right call. I did not think that was targeting. then I did that. I don't know why you throw that ball, Cam. Like it's still a close game. Like money wasn't even open. Like that's an Isaac Wilson type mistake. Like Cam, you're 25 years old. Like it's so frustrating. And there's so many plays and moments like that where it's like, what are you doing with the ball here? And I know you can't move and you can't run. That's where you're not being put in a position to succeed. So I'm not trying to be too harsh on you when you make those mistakes. And that's where the coaches should have taken you out, in my opinion, because you were clearly not right. I mean, there are going to be people who probably comment in this video like, oh, this is the guy who thought Utah was going to go 11-1 in the Big 12 or all the other predictions. And it's like, yeah, do you think I honestly would have predicted that if that's how Cam Rising was going to play? So it's just so unfortunate that this is what this season has turned into. And we'll have a lot of time to continue to talk about the offense, but Utah did not just lose this game because of their offense. The defense, and in particular the tackling, is something that needs to be discussed. And we'll dive into all of the defensive lapses in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. There's a great slate of NFL games coming up. Have games like the Steelers traveling to take on the Raiders. How about the Sunday night game? You got the Bengals and the Giants. I'm excited for the Commanders taking on the Ravens, two of the best. Well, Jaden Daniels playing like one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Lamar Jackson is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. So lots of fun NFL games. It's a good slate of college games for those of you listening this Saturday morning too. And MLB playoffs still rolling strong. So once again, you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com today. All right, Austin, jumping back in. Okay, the defense. I can't believe how bad the tackling was still. Skattebo is a very good back. He's one of the best in college football. This is a guy who had one offer. It was to Sac State, and give him credit. He worked his way up with his Arizona State team and then had an unreal game. I mean, and he's a great player. So it's not like I'm not going to say he had the game of his life. Like, this is what Skattebo does. 158 yards, 2 touchdowns, 7.2 yards per carry. I think what's so disappointing is this is a Utah defense that isn't supposed to give up 176 rushing yards in a game. Things are drastically different. I talked about this on my show this week. This Arizona State team is way different last year, but the fact that this game was 55-3 last year and you swing this year and it turns into 27-19 is hard to fathom. I mean, Utah was favored in this game by 6.5 this week, and to see it play out the way it did and just the amount of missed tackles, especially on Skattebo's first long touchdown, where you have Jonathan Hall, and there's something I want to say about the linebacker room coming up shortly. Jonathan Hall, Teo Johnson. Really, Teo Johnson has not been good tackling. Teo Johnson's been fantastic in coverage. They even said it on the broadcast before the game. He's one of the best safeties in this conference. Not when it comes to tackling. He's been abysmal there. You also get, who else missed? Rabbit Evans, who I thought played a great game. Like, a brutal missed tackle late on the drive there. There are almost everyone on this Utah defense I can dive into and talk about how they missed a tackle and missed an assignment. And that's what's so frustrating, is these are things you expected to be cleaned up over the bye, and they don't just rear their ugly head. I mean, they are all over in your face. You can't get out of the way with how poorly this team tackled this evening.
Yeah, it's obvious that Utah is really hurting from not having Connor O'Toole or Keanu Tanavasa in the lineup. I mean, the team could not get pressure on Arizona State, and that was allowing Arizona State to get completions, get past the line of scrimmage, and the tackling was not something to brag about. I mean, I think Lander Barton played one of his worst games of the year. He was over pursuing receivers. He was missing tackles like a lot of the team. This is a guy that I thought was going to be potentially the highest Ute draft pick in the upcoming draft. And I mean, if he keeps playing games like this, I hope he doesn't drop, but he might drop down the draft boards. So the tackling was just not very good anywhere. Like you said, Jonathan Hall was probably the best linebacker on the team, and he is a former safety. He switched positions. And I mean, Teo Johnson, I mean, he was going in for tackles and people were just bouncing right off him. Like you said, Skattebo is a great running back, but there's no reason that when he has 2 or 3 guys putting hands on him that they shouldn't be able to take him down. Uh, yeah, just a pretty pitiful effort by the defense, which I was stoked when Junior Tafuna got that interception. I thought it was going to be a big game for the Utah defense, but unfortunately, that play at the start of the game, Arizona State's first drive, was probably the highlight of the night for the Utah defense.
Lander was needed those blitzes where Utah has, and Lander continued to let Levitt get to the outside were devastating early. I do think Barton was still better than Hall in this game. Hall gives up the first touchdown pass in coverage. Hall missed a number of key tackles, had the big one tackle late, but the linebacker room, and this is where I want to talk about this. Back when the transfer portal, the spring one opened up, I really wanted Utah to add another linebacker. Leavani Damuni was already hurt. And I looked at Sione Fotu, who was already, and then got hurt going into this game. I'm sure that'd be Utah's defense, but Fotu's also struggled. This team should have gotten another linebacker. And that was evident tonight because it would have really helped for them to have someone out there who is a more natural linebacker, where at times Jonathan Hall would do good things. I also thought many of the biggest plays, he was one of the ones at fault for. Speaking big plays and being at fault, Zamiah Vaughn on the key third down. Zamiah Vaughn is the one who's matched up with Skattebo, and he gambles because he thinks it's going to be a short pass. So he leaves Skattebo, and Skattebo's the one who ends up getting open. It's plays like that that can't happen. We already talked about the missed tackles, right? Dallas Vaki, by the way, is going to be a dude for this Utah defense. I was really impressed with how the freshman played tonight. He's only the fact that he's a freshman and looked as good as he did is fantastic. But there are key plays. I can think of a time where every single Utah defender, where it's like, Lander, what are you doing here? Junior Tafuna, why can't you get off this block? You go down the line for, literally everyone. We already talked about Rabbit Evans did a lot of nice things, and then you see the missed tackles and the performance. And Skattebo is a tough back to bring down, but this is supposed to be one of the best tackling defenses in college football. So for them to not be able to finish and be able to execute and give up these big plays on third downs. And yes, they stepped up on fourth down and did some nice things, but the amount of long runs they allowed because of missed tackles, missed alignment. You talked about not getting pressure. Van Fillinger and Logan Fano were nowhere near consistent enough in generating that pressure there. And that's where this team does miss Connor O'Toole. And yes, they missed the players that are gone, but that's also where I'm very disappointed that, yes, Keanu Tanuvasa is obviously a big presence, but you have Junior Tafuna, you have Samote Pepe, you have Dallas Vaki. Like, yes, I'm not saying you're going to shut down Arizona State, but the fact that these big runs and the amount of just massive plays that happen, even if you're down a couple guys, you still have quality defenders on this team that should be more than up to the task. You miss those guys in your front seven for sure, but they shouldn't be the difference between you holding an Arizona State team under, just more in check. The amount of explosive plays is still just, I look back so rough. I thought Kenny Dillingham for much of the game early in the first half was getting the better of Morgan Scalley. I thought Morgan made good adjustments, and then it was just the defense not being able to tackle and execute and key coverage and give Arizona State credit for making plays. And they did that routinely tonight. Hats off to the Sun Devils. And man, this Utah team, I was going to say the Utah defense, but this Utah team just has a lot. They have to go back to the drawing board too. And they're lucky that they get TCU and Houston in their next two games, and we'll see how I expect Utah to win those next two games, but they got a long way to go if they even hope to be another two. They've done it before. They've only lost two games and made a conference championship. There is zero margin for error. And tonight's performance was filled with errors that have to be corrected.
Yeah, I'm not a defensive coordinator. Far from it, actually. I'm not Morgan Scalley. But after Sam Levitt took the rib shot from Samonte Peppa and left the game, he eventually came back. But after that rib shot and his injury, the Arizona State offense was pretty one-dimensional. It ran through one guy, and his name was Cam Skattebo. And to just see Utah get gashed how they did, for him to break off two 50-yard runs, breaking multiple tackles. Kudos for the balance control on the first 50-yard run. That was crazy. But to just see, there was a point where I think he had 6 or 7 rushes in a row. And to just see Utah get gashed when they knew exactly what was coming was really hard to look at as a diehard Utah fan.
Incredibly hard. This game was incredibly hard to watch as a Utah fan. I feel like I need to go to those eye washing stations and just completely cleanse myself from that experience. And obviously we all stayed up late, and we stayed up late for that. That's how we start our weekend. That's so frustrating. And the amount of chances and opportunities where it's third down or fourth down, get off get off the field here. Nope, can't do it. How about offensively? 3rd down, 4th down, move the chains. Nope. Doesn't matter that you got inside the 30 all these times. You're going to stall out because that's what ends up happening with this Utah team right now. And they have a laundry list of issues. So now we can look at it from this standpoint. Where does this Utah team go from here? I'll go back to what we said off the top of the show. If that is the Cam Rising we are going to see next week, and if that is how Cam Rising looks in practice, I am absolutely starting Isaac Wilson against TCU. Not only do I think he gives you the best chance to win right now, but the opportunity to get him reps against TCU and then Houston, who are 2 of the worst teams in this conference, I think is invaluable for that. So that's the very first thing I'll say. I think it's huge. I thought they were better creativity tonight, but I'll say this. There was one, unless I missed, maybe 2. Okay, there was only 2 or 3 screenplays. With the way that Utah in their passing attack is not operating right now, I need more of that. I'm glad they incorporated more motion, but just need to be better, obviously, in the passing game. That's where Cam's got to be better, and receivers going to have to continue to get open. Overall, I think they did mostly a good job. There were a couple times they were covered. There was a time early in the game where Cam threw it to I think it was Money Parks on a 3rd down. And if he would have waited a little longer, I think Carson Ryan was coming open over the middle. So quarterbacks is still the biggest issue. Defensively, got to get healthy. And Jonathan Halls, this was coming into this year, basically the 5th string linebacker because he started at safety. So the fact that he's been thrust into this role and he's struggled and he's going to continue to grow and get better. And we saw the massive hit he had on Skattebo late in the game, but there's just a lot this team has to fix. I'm not going to sit here and say the season is without a doubt over, because the one lucky thing that Utah has, I'm still an optimist, guys. I'm sorry. I'm going to be slightly positive. Utah has the chance to later in the season, and they're lucky they get TCU and Houston next, because this team is not even close to one of the 10. This team is not a top 10 team in the Big 12 right now with the way they play, but they have a chance to get right in time for a stretch in which they will be able to register head-to-head wins against the other conference contenders. Do I think this team is going to the Big 12 championship game? I do not right now, based on how they look. But I'm also not going to sit here and say the season is over. We can just punt on next season. We've seen this team make it to the conference championship game before with 2 losses. They have to get worlds better in order to do so. But that's the other thing, is when you keep getting inside the 30, when you see how close this team is to breaking through, I'm not ready to completely give up on them.
Yeah, I mean, you said it well. This team can still go the distance with 2 losses. I mean, they're going to have to win out. It's plain and simple. But you're right. They have 2 get-right games. First TCU and then Houston before taking on BYU at home. And TCU and Houston are both very winnable games for the Utah team. Obviously, there's big issues that have to get figured out in those 2 weeks. I don't want to just say those 2 games are cakewalks. I almost thought this game was going to be a cakewalk, and I couldn't have been more wrong. So I guess anything goes nowadays. But the quarterback issue just really, I think Utah just needs to choose, and they need to choose a guy, and they need to go with him the rest of the season if he can stay healthy. Obviously, a lot of Cam Rising's performance tonight could get pushed on that ankle injury he suffered earlier in the game. But to me, and I could be wrong, it seems like that hand is still bothering him. It really seems like that hand injury is worse than what we initially thought it was, and that it is lingering and it is bothering him a lot. And in that case, I think Utah just needs to go with Isaac Wilson for the rest of the season. And that's really hard to say, because Cam Rising, I mean, I don't want the Cam Rising era of Utah football to be over. I was a student during most of it, and I got to see him win conference championships, Pac-12 championships with the U. And to see the curtains closing on the Cam Rising area is a sad sight. But I do think there comes a point where Utah has to move forward, has to move towards the future. And I think Isaac Wilson is the future. So I would love to see Utah figure it out over these next 2 weeks against TCU and Houston. Obviously come out with 2 wins there. And then BYU is going to be a test. I think BYU is going to be a huge game, and it's going to determine the rest of the season. If Utah can come out of that game with a win, then they got to keep getting wins. If that game, God forbid, is a loss, well, then I think it's back to the drawing board. But I think you said a lot of great things, JT. This team has to get healthy, first and foremost, has to figure out the quarterback position, has to figure out a lot of things, frankly.
I really like where you're coming from it may be time to close the curtain on Cam Rising. And you're already there for what he's done with Utah. And I think a lot of people will agree with you. I'm still of the mind that a fully healthy Cam Rising gives this team their best chance in those big games later in the season.
I agree, yeah.
But it's also incredibly clear that we really may never see that version of Cam Rising ever again. I mean, football is a physical game, and right away he got hit and he got hurt right away. And you just look at them. I mean, he's unfortunately the definition of injury prone. I hate saying that, but there is literally no way around it based on everything that has played out over the course of his career. So can you continue to give him all the practice reps where he doesn't get hit in practice, obviously, and then he's going to get hit in the game, and then all of a sudden Isaac Wilson's going to go, and that's where you very well could be right that they may have to move forward with Isaac Wilson, and we'll see how healthy he can get in time for the TCU and Houston game. And I do expect Utah to win their next 2 games, but if Utah looks like they did tonight, they will end the season 0-4. They will lose all 4 of their final games if that is how they play this evening, because it's tough to go across the country to UCF. And those other 3, that's a Shedeur Sanders against this defense right now. I mean, that is frightening, because while the Utah defensive backs have their moments of good coverage, Shedeur Sanders makes NFL throws, and even more of them than Noah Fafita does. And we saw that one a couple weeks ago. So there was a lot to clean up for Utah football, and there's still a lot to take away from this game. We'll be diving into the film. I'll be doing that on Monday's show when it drops, and talk about all the news. We're recording this right after the game. I haven't heard everything that Kyle Whittingham has said. I'm sure he has a number of things he's saying about Cam. I'm sure Cam has some interesting things to say as well. And yeah, it's all doom and gloom for the University of Utah football program right now, but the season still has a lot left to play. Utah, well, like you said, Austin, this Utah team has to win out in order to make the college football playoff. Even if they were to make the Big 12 championship game somehow and lose, they're not. 3-loss team is not getting in unless you're a conference champion. So Utah's got their work cut out for them. It is a horrendous performance this evening. We're all frustrated, and it's going to be a long weekend, but thankfully this team is not on a bye. We don't have to marry it on it, and I'm glad they get back to work next week. So we'll be talking about it more here soon. But Austin, really appreciate you stopping by tonight. Great stuff, my friend.
Of course. Thanks, GT.
Hope you all have a better weekend and find ways to spend it than we all had to endure and suffer tonight by watching that Utah game. I greatly appreciate all of you for listening to this show each and every single day. And drop your comments below. Let us know your thoughts. This is a safe space, Utah fans, to let it all out, let the frustrations out. And I'll be doing the same. I'll join you in the comments too. And I will see you all again on Monday. Have a good weekend, Utah fans, if you're able to, after a performance like that.